You often hear the importance of having a good network in the different facets of your life. And in recent days, you've likely been hearing of the very high-profile bromance breakup, Musk and Trump, of course, the very public and very messy stoush there. So what happens, though, if people in your orbit, socially or professional, have a parting of ways? It could be a couple, it could be two friends that decide that they're not going to be friends anymore. You might feel a bit stuck in the middle. You might even feel like you have to choose a side. But how do you navigate all that? Psychology consultant and author Dr. Jo Lukens is with me now to break down the breakup. Good morning.
Good morning, Susan.
So this is a situation that we don't like to be in, but it is all too common. What are some of the most common emotions that people might experience during, I guess, being on the sidelines of a breakup?
Yeah, something of a melting pot, isn't it, of emotions?
Is,
and I think we shouldn't be surprised that happens, because essentially humans are emotional beings. And even when it is in a work environment, you gave lots of scenarios where we might see this play out. But, sometimes we think in work, maybe we need to be more professional and so forth, but we're humans in all of those environments. So we see that real mix of emotions. It could be around sadness, there could be some anger, confusion, maybe even relief in some circumstances. But it's really normal to have conflicting emotions at a time like this as you process the loss, and it can be a loss, and then adjust to what the new reality is going to be.
Yeah, there can be, I guess, a bit of a mourning of what you had once looked up to or admired.
Yeah, and because the circumstances change, so we shouldn't be surprised that it can feel something like a grief response. So we often commonly see that, particularly when there have been close relationships, that are now no more.
We talk about professional breakups, and we are very emotional beings, as you mentioned. Even those professional breakups can be just as hard as personal ones, right?
Yeah, they absolutely can. And I think a big part that plays in that is the identity piece, so that if it's, in a professional circumstance, so it might be your boss, or it might be someone that works for you, and how that feels for you if someone leaves or you got to move somebody on. So we know that it impacts, I guess in some ways I often describe it's like a stone in a pond, and it ripples out and affects everything. So, it can affect the daily routine. It can affect people's confidence and self-esteem, future plans. It really can be quite emotionally challenging for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we heal, begin to move forward from a breakup, whether it is professional, personal or beyond?
Yeah, probably no surprise. I mean, we talk about this so often, but it's really about acknowledging where you're at, I think is the place to start, and acknowledging your feelings. And sometimes people don't like the feelings that go with it, so they try to pretend that it's not happening. So we see a thing that we call denial. And generally that won't help us. So, giving yourself permission to kind of navigate through that space. If it's a really close relationship breakup, obviously that's going to take some time, and you need some time to actually grieve that. And then it's about, I guess, leaning into your networks and getting support where you need to, and doing that in an appropriate way. So there might be friends, there might be colleagues that you can talk to. You may seek out professional support, which is obviously something that can be really helpful. And then always making sure we're keeping an eye on our self-care routines, looking after ourselves through. We want to look after ourselves all the time, but particularly in times of emotional challenge, it's even more important to do so.
Yeah, it can feel very tricky. You can feel trapped in the middle, feel like you have to pick a side. It's always hard if there is a breakup, because you don't want to get involved, but you also want to be there to support people without being thought to be on a particular side. What role do friends play when you're going through a breakup?
Yeah, a very complex role that friends can have. And you sometimes see that, don't you, in personal relationships where people go, are you in Team Fred or Team Mary?
Yes.
If it's Fred and Mary that are no longer together or whatever it is. And it's that, how do you navigate that, and how do you, and maybe the circumstances are such that you do have a particular view about how that's played out. And maybe you are on a team. I don't know. It really can be quite complicated. But we know that friends can provide that emotional support and perspective. But remember that they may be going through elements of it too, maybe not as close to the coalface of it. But it is important to set boundaries around that as well. I think that can be really important, working at support and looking at how you look after yourself while your friends or your colleagues are going through that separation. So it's one of those places where being mindful around our role within the circumstances is an important part to navigate it well.
One of the other tricky things can be how you manage shared or professional circles after a breakup. Are there some strategies you might have of how to navigate that? Does it lean into that communication you were just speaking about?
I think it does. I think everything ultimately comes back to communication in a scenario such as this, and having that open communication, being aware of what you're finding uncomfortable about it, maybe having a little bit of a plan around it if you've got to go to some professional gathering that's broader than your immediate workplace or something like that, and thinking about how you're going to manage that circumstance if you come across that person or whatever that might look like. So I think that all of that little bit of planning, that self-awareness, and then the communication is all going to be big part of navigating that part of the conversation well.
What's the best sort of advice for somebody who might be struggling to move on from a breakup of their own relationships or being on the sidelines to somebody else's breakup?
Being kind to yourself, I think, is always the best place to start. Being patient, understanding that it's going to take some time, finding that support where it's needed. And I guess recognising that recovery or that healing from a relationship that's ended is a bit of a process, and it does take time. So I don't know, even if you can find one small thing to go well today, and to focus on that and to work towards that and celebrate that when that happens, and that gentleness with yourself and patience is going to be important. And then if you are feeling stuck, is knowing that there are people out there that can help, professional people that can help in that area, and it's always good to lean in. It's a real sign of strength when we can lean in and get help from others.
Psychology consultant and author Dr. Jo Lukens, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Susan.
You're on ABC Queensland.